sharing my screen, that's okay. Okay, welcome everybody to this discussion about basin scale ocean observing. This is joint between Atlantos and ANCOR, and it's an ocean hour discussion around the all Atlantic Ocean data space. And our goal here is pretty clear. I'm Brad Young, sorry, co-chair of Atlantos, and just will offer a few words of the overall introduction. Our goal here is to discuss the transition or the development of program or systems to meet societal needs for ocean information. And so by ocean information, I'm adding a layer onto data. And this is around kind of key pragmatic issues around standards and interoperability. The focus is on the basin scale, and there are lots of challenges here. How best we use data, what standards and incentives we can create. And really it's about looking for opportunities to and approaches to establish collaboration and to build partnerships. So first, I'll just tell you a little bit about the Atlantos program just for context. And so Atlantos is a program initiative broadly around basin scale observing of the Atlantic, north and south. And so, as I mentioned, I'm Brad Young, the co-chair from Canada. You can see there's people who are on the steering committee from around the Atlantic, and you'll see in the next month or so a call for new participation. And we have two of the coordinating team members here with us today, Sandra Kittelhacke from Germany and Ann Zinkan from the US. And so here's the kind of the program framework of Atlantos, and there's kind of two tracks that Atlantos takes. One, on the left panel, you can see the various use case studies, thematic focus around issues like carbon uptake or sargassum, or offering basin scale climate services tied to AMOC. These are focused around those particular activities, but more broadly, we take an approach to build the partnerships, much like we're doing here today, around the transition or the development of the link between the data as observed and the societal needs for those data. So we are working with various international partners around this. So we are a project within Goose and within GeoBlue Planet. And there are clearly lots of other partner activities around the developing UN Ocean Decade programs that we will link with and coordinate with as well. And the approach that we have broadly taken is the one that's really evolving in terms of its implementation around the blue value chain, which was first really enunciated in through the framework on ocean observing. And you can see right at the center of this is the kind of the issue under discussion here today, this transition from data as observed to information as needed by society. And it's a challenge for lots of different societal groups, but our focus here is around the Atlantic Ocean focus of this. So here today, we have a wide group of people from around the Atlantic to speak to this, and I'll pass the baton here on to Pierluigi Buttigieg, who's going to act as the moderator here, and let him introduce them. But I get to introduce Pierre, who's a senior data scientist at the Helmholtz Metadata Collaboration. And he has a title that I particularly like as a digital knowledge steward. I really appreciate that title in this context or others. And his goal is really very aligned with this discussion here today, is to build the bridge or the bridges between the data as observed to the information needs of society. So it's the bridge between science and society. So I'll stop sharing my screen once I figure out how to do that. Oh no, I need to say one more thing, sorry Pierre, before I pass on, and that is to note that there are a wide group of partners to this discussion beyond Anchor and Atlantos. And some of the speakers like Tina come from iAtlantic, a new program that has many activities aligned with this, but you can see around the Atlantic Basin through these various logos, there's lots of other groups and potential partners. Okay, so I'll end there and pass to you, Pierre.
Thank you, Brad. Yes, it's really great. I thank you for extending the invitation to moderate this very exciting session today. We have quite a lot of perspectives, and part of my work involves building interoperability specifications for IOC and IODE across regions, the Latin American region, Africa, the Pacific, for example. But it's very nice to see a basin scale coordination bringing in different bordering nations, and I think we certainly need more of those to structure the ocean data information space and have productive conversations around the specific needs of the regions that are touched by this basin. So yes, thanks. Let's kick off with some talks that from our speakers today. From then we'll go into a panel discussion and also receive questions and answers, questions from the audience. Please feel free to use the Q&A function in your Zoom. That's how we will field and triage the questions with the assistance of our coordinators. So as they come up, please put it into the Q&A and we'll go from there. So without further ado, we'll hand over to Olga Sato. She's a professor and researcher in physical oceanography at the Oceanographic Institute of Sao Paulo in Brazil. And she's also leading the Work Package 5 in Anchor, which is a coordination and support action of the European Union. And that work package is responsible for setting the common standards and data sharing interoperability. And of course, we've seen many of these in many packages, and it's going to be very interesting to see how it comes together. So Olga, over to you for your presentation. Everything okay with sharing? Yes, we see it. We don't see it in presenter mode just yet.
Yeah, hold on.
Mm-hmm. Don't worry, I speak very fast. You don't have to.
Okay.
To. It's just how I speak. Okay.
Can you see it now?
Mm-hmm. Yes, perfectly. Yes, perfectly.
Okay. So good day to all. Thank you very much for the introduction, Pierre and Brad. And as you said, I'm going to present this work that we have been working on Anchor, most specifically the Work Package 5 or data sharing, data information sharing. And I would like first to acknowledge some people who helped a lot to put all this together, Anna Hay and Nicolas Dieter and Nikki Funk. And also acknowledge everybody who's contributing to this wonderful work package that I'm trying to have this wonderful work done. So going straight to the point, our joint pilot action, it's called All Atlantic Data Enterprise 2030, acknowledging the decade of the ocean. So that's what we wanted to be in 2030. So specifically, what is this joint action, this pilot action needed? Why are we important? One thing is, and I can tell this from the experience that I already have, which I come from the science. I'm a scientist, and we see that we have been accumulating decades of data, climate variability data, ecosystem research, polar research, all kinds of ocean observation. So we have this knowledge accumulated and it's somewhere. And with this work package, the joint pilot, we wanted to create some way that we can accumulate all this, get together, harvest all this sea of data, just to make a point of how much data we have. And we have to somehow coordinate and make this data accessible. And everybody should be able to access this data, and everybody should be able to provide to the big community more data. So our mission is then create a federation of all scientific data, infrastructures, and service, not just data, but everything that comes with the data, so that we can distribute the data. And the creation of this space, the ocean data space, in the spirit of open science and open data. And this is something really important because those are the principles for the data sharing: findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data. So that's the FAIR principle, and also the CARE principle: collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics. So those are the principles that we will be work to get this data done. And as Brad already mentioned, we won't be able to do this if we don't have synergies with the existing initiatives. So we are trying to bring together all the organizations, especially the ones that are already here working on the Atlantic Ocean. And then we can have some data standards, get the best practice, how to get the best management of the data for the Atlantic to get to this point that we can have a way to share and get a better use for the data. So those are the initiatives that we are already working on, the synergies, I'm sorry. And those synergies are important because they will promote efficient cooperation, maximize impact. And the thing is, we are not going to reinvent anything. We have to learn from what people already have, learned in a long time. And that's how we're gonna go from there. So who can be involved in this enterprise, ocean data enterprise? Just a quick view, everybody, we want to have everybody included in this initiative. So as I mentioned, we're starting from the academy, research institutions and universities, but also we want to involve the industries, public sectors, private sectors, associated with the human health associations. We have the Global Ocean Observing System, GOOS system already, who has been doing coordinating a large portion of this big problem. We have to work with, and we are involved with them, and the local government and in policy makers and ministries, agencies, funding agencies, and everything, and all other types of organization, NGOs and civil society. So the idea that we come to work with the data, it's not more data for the scientists, it's to make the data available for everybody. And there's a lesson here because we have to learn how to use this data. So once we have a massive amount of data accessible to everyone, then we're gonna learn new ways to use this data. And the idea is to involve as many countries. So this is not a job for one scientist or a small group of institutions or anything. It's something that everybody has to be involved. Has to be something coordinated in a high level. And up to now, we are in contact with these countries, but our idea is to involve many more people, many more countries. So the outcome. Okay, so what's on the screen now is that what we want. We wanted to implement this data space just for every kind of use that we can plan for the future. Okay, but we have some short-term objectives, which is right now we are working on to get the roadmap for the implementation of this data space. Identify what are the metadata, metadata, who, where are they, and try to identify, the local, regional, national initiatives in the Atlantic Basin. Right now, we are trying to learn what we have. Oops. And then for the implementation in the long term, by the end of the decade, we will have this data space installed, or at least something much more concrete at the end. So the expected impacts. Okay, so all this available data will be accessible. Ocean governance will be driven, guided by this free access of relevant data. Then it will be much transparent or easier to get to the decisions once you have this information. This is one of the big problems. You have to uniform. You have a harmonization of this regional differences, national, international. So that's why we have to establish what are the standards, what are the best practice to get this data ready to use. And from our last meetings, this has been one of the most important thing that we identify, the capacity in research, management of marine data, and innovation. Basically, we have the data, but then we have to make people capable of using this data. So try to learn new skills or improve overall skills to use the data that we already have. The contribution to the All Atlantic Ocean Research Alliance ambition. So just to put in a perspective here, on the right side, we see what are the points, the main objectives of the Belém statement. And those are the main points that our work are trying to achieve. You know, all these aspects from climate variability, observation, food security, ocean technology, effects of emerging pollutant, and the polar research. So from our work package, or using this joint pilot action, we are achieving all these topics for the Belém statement. And that's what I had to show here today. Thank you for your attention.
All right, thank you very much, Olga. Very exciting, very interesting, and indeed, it's great to see that activity warming up, and I'm sure there are parallel activities to synchronize with. Your questions, please use the Q&A function inside the Zoom chat if you have questions on the talk, and we'll address them during the panel talks later. But for now, we'll move on to the next talk. I see Tina sharing her screen. Yep, looks good. It's currently in, there we go. That's great. So I have the pleasure of introducing Tina Dona. She's a scientific project manager for Pangea, the data infrastructure over here in Bremen, Germany. And she's at the Marum Institute, just down the road from me, just behind me over there. Hi, Tina, down there. So she has a research background in ecology, marine ecology, and molecular methods. So grounding in the science that goes into a lot of the data. And indeed, those life sciences and ecology, some of the most challenging data fields out there at the moment. In recent years, she's been working through EU projects and involvement in the Research Data Alliance to help improve EU research infrastructures, how they talk to each other, how they share data, and how they implement the FAIR principles. And in particular, she's been working on the implementation of persistent identifiers. That's the anchor of the F in the FAIR principles, without which we can't identify our data. And she works with the data management work package for the iAtlantic project. That's the latest implementation round, where she's working and focusing on implementing workflows for data sharing through European infrastructures and portals. So with that background, very much needed, hand over to you, Tina.
Thank you very much, Luigi, for such a kind introduction. Today, I don't have to say anything further about myself, so we move right into the talk, and we're going to talk a little bit, or I'll talk a little bit about some implementation ideas, next steps for an Atlantic metadata portal that came out of the iAtlantic project. Just to give one short background of the iAtlantic project, it's an integrated assessment of Atlantic marine ecosystems in space and time, very large project with an all-Atlantic consortium, and with 30 cruises that unfortunately due to COVID, many of course couldn't happen. But we're still working, and a lot of cruises could be postponed. So this is really great. So you can see the key objectives. We work on aligning and standardizing ocean observing in north and south, with some of the arrays deployed in southern and northern oceans, and do some mapping. Also try to bring in a lot of the legacy data that's one can really say lying around, and look at tipping points, mostly in the deep sea, ecosystems, and try to be most cost effective by cooperating and planning across the Atlantic with cruises, with the data management efforts and such, to sort of capitalize on the capacities that we have. And another part is working with industry, which I think is something that is often often mentioned, but seems to be a very difficult task. And we've been very successful with our Brazilian partners in getting data from the oil and gas industry, and they've made it available to the project and then to the larger scientific community. So as we are working in these target areas that we've identified, mostly in the deep sea, as I said, and there's some technological development as well in looking at eDNA samplers. So to the all Atlantic Ocean data space. So if we look at the enterprise, which is sort of a long-term goal for the next 10 years, we still have to take small steps to try to get there. And even if we're looking at an all Atlantic Ocean data space, this would be a distributed infrastructure. So the iAtlantic project is already sort of committed to a metadata portal to try to bring in all the data from the project and such. I'll go into more detail later. So the thing about growing a community, as I'm sure you would all agree, is a lot harder than one thinks. It's a step-by-step process, and one can agree on common goals, and then best to create opportunities to concretely collaborate. Find that a very very successful model. And then, you know, in this sense, one can come to shape a common roadmap and not, you know, from the community itself and not just individual players. So the idea for the metadata portal was already discussed in some meetings in early 2020, I think even 2019, we already talked about it, and Atlantos, IMUTNet, a lot of the sister projects on this call, this All Atlantic call, were part of this Anchor was of course there, and our international partner Seon from South Africa was also there, and then some participants from the Ministry of Technology and Innovation in Brazil, which I thought was really great. And so there's a lot of interest in such a development. There was an All Atlantic Data and Policy Forum in May of this year. And since the Belém statement focuses more on the South Atlantic, and a lot of the major gaps in data access and research needs are still in the South Atlantic, we've focused the forum on this and identified some of the research needs, that there's a lot of dark data which is there but can't be accessed, and gaps in data infrastructures, things like this, in creating human capital, which was identified as one of the major shortcomings currently to make bigger steps. And so we tried to tackle some of these challenges, maybe also through this metadata portal development. So we agreed on goals for this portal, so sort of minimum requirements that it should have, and we decided that a global identity would be absolutely essential, so that it wouldn't be tied to a specific project or a specific initiative, so it'd be open for people to identify with it. And the GEO group is that has put on the GEOS portal is a group of, don't nail me on the number, but I'm assuming around 150 countries worldwide that have sort of subscribed to this group and have committed to support it, to bring Earth observations together in one place from around the globe. And this GEOS portal is a long-term sustainable platform onto its own, so it has funding from the GEO group, and I think by now also from the European Union. So that's also, I think, a very good requirement. It already has a lot of data providers which are harvested regularly. Some of them only show their metadata. Some already also allow access to the data through the GEOS portal. And it can accommodate a very diverse technical development in the different data providers. They can sort of adapt to these things. And in making a community portal in the portal itself, sort of a sub-hub for our community, we can adapt it to the community's needs. So that was also an aspect that was found to be important. So for this, when we look at opportunities to collaborate, when we look at looking at data providers, I think a main task is to try to draw to identify and draw in more South Atlantic data providers and help with making that step to make data available or visible through through a global platform. Then, of course, if we want to make this community portal reflect the community's needs, we need input from the community. And I think that the group that we have, so all these sister projects, which some of them even run longer than iAtlantic because they're funded a little bit later, and Anchor and Atlantos, EMODnet, the Copernicus Marine Service, all these initiatives coming together, I think that we have a very strong community to make these, to set our own requirements. So this was sort of the iAtlantic vision, what we had for our project. So there's data coming in, and it goes to, these are just examples of data archives we use, and data publishing. Then this data from these archives is then moved through to some of the European, some of the global data platforms, which are already data providers for GEOS. So the data is already visible there, unfortunately in a somewhat chaotic fashion. So we're hoping that with the community portal, we can improve on this, because we're allowed to shape what we want in terms of the resources available. And we just thought that if we want a digital twin ocean or big data harvesting and processing, or this all Atlantic Ocean data space, then we have to make progress sort of on all these steps between these different actors. So the data going into the data archives, and then also it being passed on. There's a lot of error that gets passed on there, or things do not get passed on. So we think that this is a very valuable exercise. And this is sort of, if you take it on a larger scale, for this All Atlantic Data Enterprise, it's to identify these data providers and researchers to get everybody together, and then work on data and metadata standards, on sharing technical operational knowledge sharing, which is really important, and to support infrastructure development. We think that one way to have a conversation is to sort of have this metadata portal as a central point of solving some of these problems and initiating conversations. So I just wanted to, in terms of opportunities, collaborate. I think we should identify sort of all Atlantic data scenarios, use cases, and the communities. And EMODnet, for example, has this as a European example, where EMODnet Biology, for example, has harmonized their species data such that it can be used to identify non-indigenous species introductions in the OSPAR maritime area, for example. And so something like that is something one can concretely work on together with you, especially EMODnet is bringing in data from many different sources and trying to harmonize it. As another example, this is for improving storm surge modeling, and here data from EMODnet was used by the UK Met Office to improve their models, for example, because there was more wealth of data coming from EMODnet than what they had available in their model. And the next steps, if for the All Atlantic Data Community site, GEOS is putting this online soon. So it's right now just a basic catalog of Atlantic data resources. So we need to define the requirements, needs, and wishes for the customization of such a community portal, and hear from the international research community, which we can reach into through also the sister projects who all have all Atlantic consortia. And from the thematic portals already in place or developing, and map all these connections, and hopefully bring in some policymakers to tell us what is the information they need once we have all the data. And yeah, and this should all feed into this roadmap for the All Atlantic Data Enterprise. And that is the end. I went a little bit over. I apologize. I cannot talk as fast as Luigi, but I'm working on it.
Oh, it's a dark path, Tina. But no, thank you very much for that overview. Very exciting developments that also have a lot of questions attached to it in terms of the approach, the sustainability, the formation of best practices and standards. All of these things are needed, and I think we all agree on that. But the how, the mechanics, the who represents those, who do they represent? Are they inclusive enough? These are some big questions that our panel assembled here today will be able to discuss, and I'm sure they'll also be able to attend to your questions, which you're encouraged to put into the Q&A box in the Zoom chat. So let's introduce the panel. I'll ask the panelists to introduce themselves briefly, their name, affiliation, and again, one of your driving motivations for participating in fora like this. What would you like to see in terms of basin scale data management, data sharing, and data opportunities? So I'll call them out according to the order that I see in my Zoom window, which is always a risk, but I'll do it anyway. Let's see how it works. Great, so we'll start off with our first panelist here, Connor Delaney.
Oh, hi, thanks very much, Pierluigi. I'm Connor Delaney. I'm the technical coordinator at the EMODNet Secretariat. The EMODNet is the European Marine Observation Data Network, and we're tasked with collating and making accessible data observations from member states and third parties. What I would really like to see is a data space which is accessible at many layers, many levels. So you can come in as a data scientist and just access data directly. But on top of that, there's also avenues for people like policy officers or geospatial people who can access that same data from maybe a WebGIS, GIS, or from some other platform that they want to use. So that you're reaching as many different people as possible, but collecting the data once and publishing it once.
Great, thank you, Connor. Next up, we have Jeff Cullis.
Hi there. Yeah, my name is Jeff Ellis, Technical Director with the Atlantic RA for the Canadian Integrated Ocean Observing System. So based at Dalhousie University in Halifax, but working closely with other members of CEUS Atlantic in Newfoundland as well at Memorial, and across the country, RAs here in Rimouski for the St. Lawrence, as well as on the Pacific side, based mostly out of Victoria. I guess, yeah, my main motivation for attending was, obviously we have a shared ocean. We have to learn from the initiatives that have gone before. And, with CEUS being only a couple of years old now, we started in early 2019. We're not yet at the point of operationalizing our data. So we're starting to look into this. We're looking at the global telecommunication system and other things. And so it's interesting to see, we've learned so much from initiatives like EMODNet and IUS and others who have been around for a long time. So seeing what's going on across the Atlantic, I guess, in terms of getting the data more operational is a great thing for us to learn from. And also being new, we feel like we could be in a similar position to some of the groups across the South Atlantic that are just getting going. And so we're very happy to share our experience as sort of a newer RA and what that entails and the decisions we made and why. So happy to contribute.
Great. And just for clarity, RA, you mean Regional Alliance here, right?
Yes, sorry.
Okay, we're in an acronym soup, and it's become a skill in itself to track that. So thank you very much, Jeff. Next up, we have Marjolaine Krook from South Africa, I believe.
Yes, thank you. Yes, my name is Marjolaine Krook. I'm based in Cape Town, South Africa, and I'm employed by the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment. And my role there is to be a senior scientific advisor for OSIM, which is the Oceans and Coast Information Management System, and which provides knowledge support for management and of the ocean areas and the sustainable use of the ocean. And part of this OSIM, we've established the Marine Information Management System, which is tasked with the long-term preservation of ocean and coastal data collected in South Africa by government, but we also support data collected by other parties. And in particular, we are maintaining at the moment the Southern African data, the SATCO database. So my interest in joining this meeting today is, similarly, we want to adhere to the fair and care principles highlighted by Olga in her introduction. We're interested in knowledge exchange, capacity building, promoting open data policy and data exchange, and really making sure that the systems in the regions are there is interoperability between the systems so we can talk to each other, and just promoting good practices essentially. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. We have two more panelists to go. So first, Pat Hogan.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Pat Hogan. I'm from NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information, or NCEI in the US. I spent a lot of my career studying the dynamics and building forecast systems of the Atlantic and global oceans. But more recently, I manage a portfolio within NOAA on ocean observations, and it's a wide-ranging portfolio. So the interest that I have and NCEI have is to facilitate and be involved in the ingest, archiving, and public access of all ocean observations, particularly those in the Atlantic. One of the main products that comes out of my portfolio is the World Ocean Atlas and the World Ocean Database. And, obviously we work very closely with Goose and IOC and IODE on those products, but we also have higher value chain or higher tier products that have a wide range of applicability, including coral reef conservation, ocean acidification, even into the high latitudes of the North Atlantic as well. So, our interests and in cooperating and being involved in this effort are wide-ranging, and I really look forward to more fruitful discussions. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. And our last panelist, last but not least, are an early career representative, Othman Dakaki, please.
Thank you. So I'm Othman Dakaki, and I'm from Morocco, a PhD student from the University of Mohammed V in Morocco. I'm doing a PhD in applied mathematics, especially in the help of decision making with respect to fishery management. And I'm also here in behalf of the All Atlantic Ocean Youth Ambassadors, as representing them as the voice of youth in the Atlantic Ocean. And I will end up just by wish that the youth ambassador wish that youth should be more involved with the data process, getting data, applying data, and just with the process that data is for all and all for data, and that we should collaborate together. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Othman. I think those are already very wise words coming from our youth, which is often happening more and more often these days. And I think that's a good place to start the conversation among the panelists. We've all expressed the desire and the need to share data, to get at each other's data, and to express our data across the different initiatives and nations and disciplinary communities, intergenerational gaps, etc. But there is also a tendency, we saw in our presentations, that there are large projects bringing this data in, but how do we get that, the data sharing, the progress made, how do we get that to survive beyond the project? When the funding dries up, how do we make it add up to something bigger at a basin scale? So I'll put that out there. If you have an intervention as a panelist, please raise your hand, and then I'll call on you as it goes. You can use the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen, and then we'll just use that to keep the order. So again, the question, how do we persist the progress made in these very impressive projects, the surveys, the roadmaps, the data portals? Often this tends to not persist longer than the project unless there's another mechanism to pick it up. So what are your thoughts on that? Tina?
So I think that was part of sort of the thought of going with an already established portal. Even GEOS is far from perfect, but anything can be improved. Is to make sure that it's sort of the vehicle you're using in itself is already long-term sustainable. And if you're working with sort of the distributed infrastructures, data infrastructures, and they have developed capacities and interest in sharing their data through such a platform, for example, or others. I think that's something that persists because these archives in itself are long-term sustainable, hopefully. And I think part of this data enterprise is making sure that funding is there to ensure that they can grow and become a sort of a trusted place to put your data. So I think this is, you have to look for external structures which are useful and have, create incentives for structures which are also long-term established to continue the work, even if the scientists in the project eventually go on to other things.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you, Tina. And I see two hands raised from two of the infrastructures. So Connor first, and then Jeff, followed by Marjolaine. But I'm happy that those hands are up, because EMODnet, and also I'd imagine CEUS, would have to absorb a lot of this information from projects, but that puts an additional overhead on the infrastructures to choose what can be done and how it can be shared. So what are your positions on this?
Well, it's a very interesting question, and people need to think about how they think about data. Data is a product. You have produced something. A lot of time we tend to confuse the portals that get built as being the end product. You should really think, if you've done observations, you've made a data set, then treat that as your product and realize that you need it to have a life beyond your portal. So if it's open data, you need to associate a license with it, and then you need to find somewhere for it to survive. Now, if it's at a national level, you have your national ocean data centers. In EMODnet, we have a data ingestion portal that people can go and put data in there. There's the Panagia system as well. But don't get the two confused. Your data is extremely important. And don't tie the data into your portals. Mm-hmm. And give an example is, if your data is in a database, then you have to build an interface to the database for people to get access to your data. But if your data is just in, say, CSV files or NetCDF, you can build your database on top of that, but you can also put your data somewhere else where somebody else can build a database on top of it. So treat your data as a precious commodity, because it is, and love it.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you, Connor. And that's a very important perspective, because in that, again, being very clear that there's a strategy for data and a separate strategy for the technology that works upon it is very key at the strategic level. Well, obviously it's a strategy, but what I mean is the management and policy level. Mm-hmm. Because if you confuse the two, you get lock-in, you get stuck in an infrastructure and another one can't do it. And it's sort of a challenge to you. Why can't I search EMODnet and also simultaneously search the holdings of Pangea and IUS, etc.? This is not a question to answer, something to think about. Mm-hmm. But part of that is because we tend to confuse the two, and we're, as a community, increasing our maturity. Jeff, your position from the Canadian perspective, and also, as you mentioned, you're beginning to interface and beginning to formulate those strategies. So what's your take on it?
Yeah, no, that's a critical question for us, definitely within CEUS. We have been on short-term funding, I guess, ourselves. We're looking for longer term, and that's obviously very important to get that longer-term funding to do proper data management, archival, that kind of thing. We are doing a couple things on the technical side that help with that. Using tools that federate, our data catalog can be harvested up a level and can harvest from sources below a level. So if we can allow data providers to continue hosting their data and just find a good way to federate that through our systems, rather than taking on the full burden of hosting all that data, so that it does disappear if we disappear. So using that federation piece and allowing the data owners who have the capacity to host that is one way of continuing to make it available longer term. And we are, of course, also relying on national initiatives, national archives, similar to NCEI in the States. We've got a federated research data repository that it aims to last longer. So trying to infiltrate those initiatives with better, more comprehensive metadata standards and data interoperability standards can really go a long way in terms of getting that data used beyond the timescale of a single project.
Right. No, thank you very much. And I think that's actually, you've touched on something. We say the FAIR principles and the CARE principles. They are principles. They are not implementation guides, in the sense you can be completely fair, but still unable to interoperate with another system because your interpretation of those principles are different. This feeds into those keywords we use like best practices and standards, because again, we have to make sure that we're doing the same thing for the same group of users. Marjolaine, you have an intervention on that too. And the South African perspective is particularly interesting in my mind, because it often represents a mid-capacity nation in terms of access to data and also access to expertise. And you've come up with some very creative solutions in that context. So please go ahead.
Yes, for me, there's to ensure the sustainability of the system, there's two points which I'd like to put forward. The one is building capacity, especially as you say, if you're not a developed country, often human capacity is quite low. So developing capacity is really important. And then linking the data to the users is also very important, because then you create some dependencies. If the data is being used, then the system, there will be more interest in maintaining the system over the longer term. The one thing that I notice is just a comment is that in a lot of the proposals that come out to support this kind of initiative, the funding is most of the time directed for travels, meetings, or funding students, which is great. But I wonder if it wouldn't be also better if we could have some funding mechanism to promote capacity building within the existing institutions, to make sure that, you know, because with students, they often move around, and then you build that capacity nationally, and then that capacity leaves the country. So I think for me, there needs to be a greater balance between developing students, which is very important, building that capacity, but also making sure that the capacity can be retained within the country where it's been developed. Yes.
And I think that feeds in. So some of the conversations I've had about data policy development in some think tanks, they deal with these systems. There's a political consequence to data sharing. If the data is centralized in systems that are out of country, there's a risk of a sort of data colonialization or data colonialism dynamic appearing. Like there are generators of the data and then central infrastructures in high capacity nations that run advanced services, attracting more funding, etc. Where really, of course, nations have an interest in developing their own digital capacities. And that fuels the counter, which is data sovereignty and data localization and barriers to sharing. You know, these are things that we have to balance by our own behavior as a scientific community. So I think all of those things feature in there. I know Pat has an intervention, but Connor, do you have something directly on that? I think you reacted.
Very much so. This is very much determined by the license you attach to your data. If it's open data, you've given it a push, it's got momentum, and you don't really have any choice of what's going to happen with it. So, I mean, a great example of this is what happened with all the Earth observation data from Landsat and Copernicus, where the Amazon and Google came on and just copied it all because it's open data, and they made it available to software developers who built lots of wonderful technologies on top of it. So, I mean, I would say, you know, try and make the data, set your data free, put an open data license on it, and push it out there.
Mm-hmm. And I believe, Othman, you also, Pat, would you like to come in at that stage?
Yes, I'm sorry, for some reason the raise hand option isn't showing up on my toolbar. I've used Zoom a million times. But anyway, just briefly, I just wanted to say, so one of the efforts that we're working on right now is to put the World Ocean Database into the cloud. And, you know, so we're trying to make access as easy as possible. And I appreciate what you're saying about kind of colonialization of data. We really go out of our way to try to avoid that. I mean, I get the US is always kind of the gorilla in the room, but so you know, we make a variety of formats available: NetCDF, CSV, thread servers, ERDAP servers, WOD in the cloud, and So initially it'll be a static database where you can access, and we do quarterly updates of the World Ocean Database. And by the way, 60% of the observations that go into the World Ocean Database are collected by non-US observing programs. So, you know, it's super critical to that effort, but we're looking at a very robust and dynamic cloud-based access system, but probably not for a couple, 2 or 3 more years, maybe in the 25, 26 timeframe. But, you know, it's always, without access, the archive doesn't really mean anything.
Exactly.
We're very cognizant of that.
It's really interesting because that's a technological intervention that's actually addressing these big ideas of data democratization. If there are central architectures that have to be for the reason, because of circumstances, etc., if they can make the data more accessible to those who cannot download the whole thing, you know, by cloud chunking it, etc., we're opening up opportunities for training, for innovation in countries that don't have that capacity up yet. And I think, Othman, you had an interesting case with this in some of your modeling work, correct? You're muted at the moment. There we go.
Yes. So, for example, in my case, when I'm working on modeling in Morocco, I found that I couldn't access Moroccan data since it's partly hard to get access to. However, I found some European data which works with what I could access to, so practically my model is more retuned to European case than my own country case. And that's because just as PhD students, difficulties of getting data, finding data is difficult since we don't have much network to get access to data. And we found ourselves looking for any available data to work on, which quickly makes us either hungrier to get more data and understand how we can get our own data to work on. And this will create another problem of hoarding data, which when someone finds some available data on the internet, it will not share it with others. And this will create somewhat people hiding their own data and working with them. And some, for example, my case, I have no accessible data in my country and need to look for data outside.
Yeah, and I think that's a key point too. Like the incentives to share data. We all here wish more data is flowing. We want open licenses so there's more creativity. However, scientists in the scientific part of the equation, we're not rewarded for sharing data, but for publications. Therefore, the data hoarding that Othman mentioned is a key. That is changing. There are data journals, there are incentives, but I think that's a message we have to keep propagating out to funders, to policy developers, to say, look, the data is a first-class asset in itself, well-formed, well-tracked. And, you know, Othman, that also brings in the other side of it. Where the data comes from, the provenance of the data. All data is biased somehow. It's collected for a certain purpose. It's collected by certain people with a certain view. And I find that we're particularly weak in our metadata. And this is part of the reuse part of FAIR. We're particularly, and also from the CARE principles, that sort of like control and ownership and all of that. We're particularly weak at tracking where it came from, what methods were used on it, be they best practices or local practices. How are your systems dealing with that at the moment?
Yeah. So basically in my own work, I've just tried to understand the whole literature about what that data came from, what was the purpose of the data, how it got gathered. And fortunately for my case, it was actually the same mental study and the same background of the studies, which was fortunate for me because I just had I've just reused the data in a different country. Well, you used the data for my country, but it was the same background of data. However, one of my friends was unlucky because the data was gathered for some other processes and it was biased data. So he needed to clean the data, understand it, maybe retune the inside of his model to understand what's the purpose of the data and how we can find it. And sometimes, I think this might look bizarre, but sometimes we kind of need to hash between data and get this one, get that one, and find and tune them together to get a unique data that work with our model. Absolutely,
data synthesis is a key, and I think many more younger researchers will have a career with reusing data for synthetic studies. But I'm particularly wondering, Connor, Tina from the Pangea side, Jeff, Marjolaine, how are we tracking where the data comes from? How are we tracking the provenance, the trustworthiness of the data? Marjolaine?
Yes, sorry, I actually didn't want to answer that question, but I wanted to talk about something that's been mentioned before. I think sharing the data for research purposes is still very problematic, especially in regions that are fairly data poor and where there's little capacity. Scientists tend to want to hold close to their data because they know the moment they release it, there's a risk that someone else from another country publishes before them. And as you said, because the emphasis on publication is so important, and that's actually harming us in terms of data sharing. But the other point I wanted to make is that if you want data for an operational purpose, and then maybe more for a service-oriented use, then you can build a value-added product on the data. So you provide users with a value-added product, but not the data itself. And within the OSIMS project, which I'm managing, we've managed to convince people to share data based on the principle that users don't actually have direct access to the data. They've got access to knowledge derived from that data. So that's one way of data sharing, which is not ideal because the data is not directly accessible for research purposes, etc. But at least it allows maybe some people to feel more comfortable with sharing certain data to provide services. So, but I think we need to really change the mindset about open data and make people realize that actually there's so much data out there. Nobody has time to look at your data.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
And the potential for collaboration and actually publishing is higher if you share your data, but that's still very difficult to put this message across to people.
No, exactly. And that interoperability is the key, because more and more it's going to be machine agents and AIs that are looking at the data, not individual humans. But right now, it's as Othman said, it's biased towards certain regions. There are gaps that we know of. And so the AIs will also be biased, etc. We have to really change that. And we need AI specifications. Jeff and Tina, I see your hands up. And then we'll move on to questions from the audience. There are a few on our Q&A. So panelists, please take a look at the Q&A so you can pick and choose. But first, Tina and Jeff, you can have your interventions.
Sure. Yeah, so I guess here, as a newer initiative, we're working mainly with established partners. You talked about where we're figuring out provenance, and so yeah, that probably does bring in some of those biases, but you do have to start somewhere. We are working a little bit with some citizen science, more citizen science-based data gathering as well. And yeah, I think just getting things centralized. I mean, Othman talks about the difficulties as a researcher, as a PhD student, to find data sets to work with. I mean, I think everyone here is probably really well suited to be able to answer those questions, but it's a matter of communicating that to all the younger researchers out there who don't know where to start. And where are they going to go first? They're going to go to the internet. They're going to Google things. They're going to go to the Stack Overflows. I guess as a programmer, that's where I'm thinking of. And so the more we can meet people in the communities where they're going to first start looking, I guess, and building maybe common training materials on YouTube about how to interact with the data that's already out there in different places. I mean, maybe that'll help tie together some of these loose ends about, okay, we see people doing things one way in one region, another way in another region. There's a lot of overlap. How do we write one use case that can help both sides? Those kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm rushing a bit because I'm mindful of time, so we have to wrap up soon. But at the same time, really key points mentioned there. Also picking up some things in the chat from Benjamin File and others. The more we meet people where they are and allow the data to flow in a system-independent way, we can also back it up when things go wrong with one of these systems, with one of these hubs, policy decision, technological issues, malicious attacks. We need to think about redundancy, and that requires greater interoperability. Tina, your intervention?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in sort of tracking, the use of data. So like Pangea puts, or other infrastructures put DOIs on their published data sets, and this carries through to other platforms much easier than the metadata itself. So you're always linked back to the original description, and I think there's a lot of conversations that have to be had with publishers who are adding DOIs to data access sections, which don't create. It's not a citation if it's not part of the reference section, and that's a big problem because data publication should be part of your impact as a scientist. That's incentive, right? But if it's just a DOI somewhere in the manuscript, that it doesn't get picked up by any of the services that try to filter these things and to attribute them to the author. So I think there's a lot of work there that needs to be done to make sure that this is also linked back to the authors.
Absolutely. And again, that raw data is the foundation. I'm looking at Brad's question inside the question and answers. If we want to elevate data to information, to knowledge, and go through that, change to different ends of different value chains, that needs to be the flexibility. The data has to be stable, standardized enough that that can be done efficiently and not require a whole team of people to dig things up and archive it. We're a long way away from that. But I want to end on a positive note and also another question in there. Where should we focus our efforts? There's so much to do. We know that there are many issues out there, but there are also many opportunities. So just a quick round through the panelists right now. Where should we focus for an all-Atlantic data space? What is going to be really motivating point where we can come together and show that, yes, aligned implementation of the FAIR principles is going to take us to a better place? What should it be? Tina, you still have your hand up, so I'll pick on you.
I keep forgetting to put that down. Sorry. So I think for the ocean data space, it's I think the biggest effort should be on getting everybody in the game together at the table and to do this along the Atlantic and to define what the benefits are of what we're doing, to sort of create national incentives to build basic data infrastructures for data publishing, archiving, and such. So I think that's once you've sort of done your homework there, everything up the ladder is a lot easier. So I think this is where I think we should put the focus.
Absolutely, and that's co-designed to solve a problem rather than building solutions in search of problems. So that's an excellent case. Jeff, over to you briefly.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's a big question, and I guess in cases like this where we've had trouble answering some of these big questions, it seems like there's been a lot of talk about the data, but the use cases is the other part around that. And the more we can, in CUSE, we're building use cases around how users are using our data. I know IUSE is doing some similar things with their benefits of ocean observing. The more we can build up these catalogs of, here's a user who's found the data a certain way, and how to do that, and how to make the data interoperable and answer those kinds of questions on a local region kind of aspect. The easier it is to sort of take those pieces locally and build, find the common areas where we can say, okay, here's a good way to do it across the board, and sort of build the international standard that we can then just point to within the region. So
yeah, no, that's a very key part. Again, cataloging across regions and basins. And there was a question that was answered in the Q&A about the IODE systems like the Ocean Info Hub and Ocean Data and Information System, which are aiming to do that in the UN space for the decade and beyond in that neutral spot. Very lightweight to allow the regions to develop their technologies and push it forward. Full disclosure, I'm participating in that project. That's why I'm so enthusiastic about it. But Connor, over to you.
Always the hard questions. Thanks. I'm going to say something very simple here. It's branding. So if you're in Europe and you're collecting data, ocean observations, you should be making sure that your data goes either through your national ocean data center or into EMODNet system, whatever way it is, either through the data ingestion system or through the data aggregators. If you go, say, I'll give you an example of this type of thinking. If you go to on the cloud to Amazon Registry of Open Data Sets and you look at the NOAA data sets there, they're all branded with the NOAA label. You've got reassurance that you're dealing with an institution that is very much focused on data quality. So rather than isolate your data on a server island somewhere, try and get your data into some known infrastructure that exists either in your country or in your region. And then, of course, you can use copies of your data for other things, but you're giving your data an extra life by pushing it along.
Mm-hmm. No, good, excellent intervention, because again, that helps those infrastructures even understand the needs. If they don't see you, they don't know what the needs are and they can't develop in that direction, while making sure the data is portable beyond them, if that's necessary, if it needs to be moved. Pat?
Yeah, I'd just like to second what Connor said. And it doesn't have to be in the US, it can be in Europe, it can be anywhere. But getting those those very expensive to collect observations into a sustainable long-term archive is really critically important. But it's not just the archive, as I said before. I think on a larger, maybe on a broader scale, we really need to focus on access. And so, sometimes threads work, sometimes, sometimes the servers work, sometimes, and there was a comment in the about whether it's in NCEI or in another place, and was NCEI down during the government shutdown, all these things. So, I'm a strong advocate for multiple copies and very sustainable ocean centers, and B, a focus on access, quick, reliable, global public access to the community, and both raw data and QC data.
Great, thank you. Yes, and indeed, we've seen success stories of that with, for example, nucleotide data, sequencing data. Early on, mandated 3 centers around the world: Europe, the US, and Japan, synchronized every day. In case something happens to one, the heritage, the data heritage, the legacy is safe. We have to have that same thinking for our other oceanographic data. Marjolaine, closing words, thoughts? What's the low-hanging fruit that we should be going for right now?
No, I mean, I agree with the previous intervention. I must say I really like the idea put forward by Tina on tracking the use of the data. I think that there is a lot of effort that needs to be put in there, and that should be a priority of this project, is maybe establishing, designing how to do that within the project could be something we try to do.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Othman, your closing thoughts, looking into the future from your career will probably be longer than all of ours. So, what do you need? What do you need to do your work in the future? And what do you need the All-Atlantic data space to do?
Yeah, so me as a mathematician, I'm just sitting down in my office waiting for someone to give me the data, or just give me the data. But I think one of the things that we trying to advocate as youth ambassador is youth should be more engaged with data. As an early age, should understand what's data, what we need it for, that the whole world is about data. And then we should tell them that the ocean is data, forest is data, water is data, and then we'll get them this anxious feeling about the worth of data, synchronizing it, improving them, giving them food for their thoughts, because as long as youth exists, the future is safer. And as for us, I think now we should start with maintaining that data should be accessible for everyone from the north to the south of the Atlantic, and as to be also distributed in a whole network, because as long as we don't have the quality of internet possible to download gigabytes of data. So probably you need to work on the clouds, sharing data around universities, creating some network between universities, and sharing this human resources that we have currently and we will have in the future.
Right, thank you very much. It's very pithy. So human skills, data as a service, infrastructures as a service. Behind those words, there's so much technology, standard development, etc. I see Olga has dropped in too. She had some connection issues initially. So we're winding up, Olga, but the question is, what is the opportunity that you'd like to pursue now for the All-Atlantic data space?
Yeah, thank you. I've been following, just wrap up with what just Othman said. And I think I was thinking that we here are preaching for the converted. We know what we need. We are just adding. It's okay, everybody. We have all these evidences. We know that's what we need. And I think that something that we have to pursue is the education, change the culture of data sharing and stuff. So within this decade of the oceans, it's not just technology or capacity building or everything. We have to get more to the people who are investing in us, try to get the higher level of government to be more involved. So we have to change something more than that, which is just the whole mindset, the culture of this data sharing. I don't know how to do that. Maybe, if we get more investment on, education, or if you get like someone just mentioned today, that if you're going to publish something, you have to make the data available. So those acts will, I think it will contribute to get to this point that I don't know, in a decade or two, we're going to reach what we are aiming for.
I think we should try to do it faster, but very well taken. And also like getting that policy aligned to say, yes, this is a first-class citizen of observation, of research, of operations. Data is that key that we're going to build things on. And we can't preach to the converted all the time. We have to align our activity and show what can be done. And I think that's opportunities like an all-Atlantic space, a Pacific space, Indian Ocean, Southern Ocean, linking together through IODE or UN Decade technologies to show if we align our activity, we can get something done. But that shows that the funders should also align the funding to such things. But it's a human part of the equation. I think we'll end with that yes, there's great opportunities, that's lots of data. It should not depend on your professional network. You should be able to access it equitably based on what's there and cataloged. And it's a common good for all. So I'll end there and hand back to Brad for closing words. Apologies to all that we extended over our time, but I'm sort of got a little bit excited there. Data gets us going. But it was a fantastic discussion. Thank you all panelists. We will be in the Wonder Me social gathering space if anyone would like to engage with us just informally afterwards. There's the link that's going to be popped up there. So Brad, over to you for closing words.
Luigi and all the speakers, thank you very much for that. I think I heard lots of interesting ideas and good discussion. And I would say one of the answers to the various questions is that we need to do precisely what we are doing here, which is building community, because we need to work together, and part of that is coming together to share ideas, but also to recognize that there's a wide group of people with this shared common interest. And I think the point was made that, I think perhaps by Olga, that in a sense we're the converted. And so we also need to go out and proselytize a little bit to encourage others who are parties to both this activity, but also the policymakers and those who need access to the data and information. So thanks everybody for the contributions here. And I think we'll, continue through initiatives like this, but also the programs and the developments within the ANCHOR All Atlantic Ocean Data Space. There's lots of opportunity for us to contribute to resolving and the challenges, but also working towards a better outcomes from all of what we're doing. So thank you all, and reiterate the invitation to join the Wonder Me space. There's a link that Sandra put in the chat there. It does not work with Safari. If you're on a Macintosh computer, I can assure you that's not a way to go, but it works with other browsers fairly effectively. So we can have kind of casual conversation there. Sandra's just put the link there again. And thank you all again, and we'll continue to follow up on these discussions. There's lots of activity in place, and great to have had this discussion. Thanks to all.